It's Reading with Rella B.
Rella B.
I just have one question. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Are you ready to come along with me? Are you ready
Yeah.
to imagine with Rella B?
Hey friends, it's Rella B. Thanks so much for coming to read with me. I am so excited that you're here. If this is the first time that you're listening to my podcast, I just want to let you know that we're going to go into a stretching series to get our brains and our bodies ready to listen to a great book. I have a special guest that's going to be sharing their book with us today. And then I'm going to ask you guys a riddle to get you warmed up and ready for what we're going to be listening to. After that, we are going to be doing our shout outs and then we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So to go ahead and get started, let's start stretching. We are going to stretch our arms out wide. Always just be mindful of the space that you have. You can do this sitting down or standing up. Stretch your arms as wide as they can go so you can see one arm. If you turn your head, you see it. How far can it reach? How far can it reach? How far away is it from you? Stretch them both out. Put them in front of you and then put them behind you. Remember, don't hurt yourself if you're stretching. Raise them up high in the sky, high in the sky. Now bring your hands down to your head and put your hands on top of your head and tap, tap, tap. Get your brain ready. Tap, tap, tap on your head. Tap, tap, tap. And then go bring your tapping fingers down to the back of your neck. Bring them down to your shoulders. Tap, tap, tap. And bring them down to your chest, to your belly, to your legs. And then let's wiggle our toes. Wiggle, 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 wiggle our toes. Roll our ankles. Maybe you roll one at a time if you're standing up, and then wiggle your leg, wiggle your whole leg, and then shake it all out. Shake it out. All nice and good. Now that our bodies are ready, let's go ahead and get our brains ready too. So how this is going to work is I'm going to give you 3 hints, and then I'm going to give you 10 seconds to guess. And this is going to have to do with our special reading a little bit later. Are you ready? All right, let's put our thinking caps on. Hint number 1. I'm a big round bird, often seen on farms, especially during Thanksgiving. Who already has it? Or do you need hint number 2? Okay, hint number 2. I have a wobbly thing on my head. And people like to roast and eat me. Eee. Do you know with hint number 2 what it is, or do you need hint number 3? Okay, hint number 3. I make a funny gobbling sound and strut around, but I can be found on your Thanksgiving table sometimes. What am I? What do you think it is? If you guessed a turkey, you would be correct. And since it is Thanksgiving week, we are going to be having a special reading that has to do with Thanksgiving. And it's actually going to be about monsters. Even though monsters are normally Halloween monsters, we have a special guest that's going to share his year-round monsters with us. All right, we're going to go ahead and welcome him. This is Greg. Hi, everybody. We have our friend Greg here today. He is going to be sharing a special book that has just come out. Greg, can you tell us a little bit about your book? I know that Halloween has just passed and your book is about monsters, but you said monsters are year-round.
Correct. Well, thank you so much for having me. You're right. The Monsters of Marymount Mansion. It came out in early October, and so instantly everyone went, oh, it's a Halloween book. It's monsters. But these monsters, while Halloween is Toby's favorite holiday in the book, it actually goes through Thanksgiving and Christmas and all the way up to New Year's. So Toby is going out into the world and trying to experience other holidays as well.
That is so exciting. I'm excited. So we're going to be going into Thanksgiving and getting a little bit of a taste of your book, right?
Absolutely. What I'll do is I'll read from the beginning so, the listeners can get a sense of what's going on with this. I'll tell you it's just about some monsters that live in the basement of this old mansion. And that's what we need to know, I guess, to start.
Wonderful. We're excited to meet these monsters.
Excellent. Well, let's dive right in. All right. The Monsters of Marymount Mansion, just so everyone knows, it is illustrated by Shelby Goodwin. She's done an amazing job on the cover. And then there's some black and white illustrations throughout since this is a chapter book. Prologue. "Toby, wake up," he heard his mother saying. Had he really been asleep that long? He felt like he had just seen the moon rise high in the October sky from the small window where he could watch the outside world. When you lived with strict rules the way that he did, the days would all run together, and nighttime would go by too quickly. He often found himself very bored. What 8-year-old should have to live this way? He asked anyone who would listen. But no response came. Just the sound of his own voice echoing off the musty walls after his mom had left him. Toby tried to think of something that could bring him happiness for the day. It was October, and October meant one of his favorite holidays, Halloween. Chapter 1. The House on the Hill. Fall was in the air around the historic mansion at the top of the hill in the small town of Reddington. Celeste Marymount and her staff, married couple Rick and Margaret Harley, were hanging up Halloween decorations around the mansion, which had been passed down through generations of Marymounts before her. Even though she had very few guests, it was always important that the place be fully decorated for each holiday. "Sometimes I think I'm getting too old for this," Celeste said. "Being in your 70s isn't old," Rick replied. "Tell that to my niece and nephew." "Oh, we haven't seen them in so long," Margaret said as she hung bat wings around the fireplace. "Those two are older with families of their own," Celeste said. "They take after their dad and don't care about making it back to their family home." "We care," Rick announced, "and I appreciate it," Celeste said. "Sometimes I think you two are more like family than my actual family." "Well, family is what you make of it," Margaret observed. "We are chosen family." "Oh, I like that," Celeste said. Family had always been important to Celeste. It was the generations before her that opened the mansion to the public as a place for people to spend the night and wake to a delicious home-cooked meal. Guests were greeted each morning by the smell of biscuits and gravy with sizzling sausage in the pan the moment the neighboring rooster woke them with its vocal alarm. Famous celebrities and politicians had found rest in the rooms of this very cozy home for years. But as the town of Reddington changed and new highways didn't lead to downtown, the number of customers had dwindled. Now the mansion was lucky to get a few guests throughout the year. "I need to get out on that porch and fix some of those creaky boards this weekend," Rick said. "Oh, I don't know," Margaret chimed in. "It sort of adds to the spooky house on the hill feel for the season." She turned on some music, and the three laughed and danced around the room. Celeste let out a boo-hoo, giving her best ghost impersonation. Suddenly, there was a creak from the basement door down the hallway, as if someone was turning the doorknob. "Did anyone hear that?" Margaret asked, wide-eyed. "I didn't hear anything," Celeste said. "Oh, must have been the wind," Margaret uttered, glancing around. "You are always hearing noises in this old house," Rick interjected. "You can't help it," Celeste said. "The noises are all part of being in a 150-year-old home. So, where should we put these jack-o'-lanterns?" The subject successfully changed. The other two went back to putting up Halloween decorations, while Celeste headed to the kitchen to bake some cookies. Even though there were no paying guests at the moment, there were others in the house who loved the smell of baking cookies. Celeste had often thought of sharing her secret with Margaret and Rick, but wasn't sure how they would take it. She had been sitting on this mysterious information for decades. She had never even told anyone in her family the secret of Marymount Mansion. No one else knew about the monsters who lived in the basement. That's right. Celeste wasn't alone, as she always had company living beneath her. It had been her idea several decades before to allow the monsters to come upstairs when she would throw big Halloween parties. They loved that they could mingle with her guests, as everyone thought they were dressed up for the occasion. The guests would come as witches, mummies, and vampires, and the monsters would fit right in, sometimes winning the best costume contest at the end of the night. Through the years, Celeste had become close with the monsters. She was never frightened of them. They had their own families and carried about their business in the basement. She would see to it that they had food, and they all looked forward to the one night of the year when they could come out of the basement and join the townspeople. She had witnessed monster weddings and monster births. She felt as if they were extra family members. Celeste was lucky to have the Monsters of Marymount, and she believed they felt lucky for having her. "Hold up your end on that cobweb," she heard Margaret say to Rick down the hall. The two worked just as hard as she did to get the place ready. There was one particular monster that she knew loved Halloween, and she looked at him as if he was her own grandchild, Toby. She was there when Toby was born and had watched him take his first steps, speak for the first time, and read his first book. Toby did everything other little boys and girls did. If it wasn't for the fact that he was a monster, Celeste believed he could have gone to school and become a very smart child. But Toby was different from the children in town. He looked different with his furry green skin that felt something like a cross between a fish's and a dog's. He sounded different because his accent wasn't always the same as humans. He smelled different, which wasn't a bad thing since he smelled like cotton candy. Whenever Toby got nervous or excited, he would let off a huge cloud of the sugary stuff. Celeste knew it had been Toby trying to come upstairs earlier. He always wanted to get out of the basement. The closer they got to Halloween, the more excited and impatient he would become. "We're heading out now," Rick announced, standing in the kitchen doorway. "Oh, the day goes by so quickly with your help. You two have a wonderful evening at home," Celeste said. "You too. Enjoy the stillness of the mansion." "We will see you tomorrow," Margaret added as they went outside. The sun was starting to go down, and Celeste watched as Rick and Margaret's car drove away. She locked the front door, dimmed the lights in the big, spacious house, and went to the kitchen to pick up the plate of cookies. She made her way down the long hallway to the large door that separated her from the basement dwellers. The door opened with a creak, and she slowly started down the steps. "Toby? I know that was you earlier trying to get upstairs," Celeste called. "Come out of those shadows and talk to me." And that's the end of chapter 1.
This is already so exciting. We're getting a look at the monsters that live in the basement. How did you come up with the name Toby for your main monster?
You know, it's funny that Toby just kind of came to me. A lot of times when I'm writing, names will change midway through from what I start with to what I end with. Toby popped in my head and it stayed forever. Now, I changed the last name of the monsters, and I changed, at one point, the mother calls him out by all 3 names, which I remember when I was a child, if I got in trouble, my mother would use my first, middle, and last name.
Oh, yeah.
So that stuff I played around with, but just the name Toby just came to me one day and it stuck, which was so funny. When I worked with my editor, my editor's name was Toby, and I'm like, well, there's a sign right there. You have to be the editor of this book then.
Oh, wow. I absolutely love that. So we're so excited to hear about the Thanksgiving portion. What does Toby think about Thanksgiving since he loves Halloween so much?
Absolutely. So as she had described, Celeste had said she would always let them come upstairs for the Halloween parties because nobody could tell that, that they were different. They just thought they were in costume. So this year, she and Toby's parents have decided that at 8 years old, he can go out trick-or-treating. So it's the first time he gets to go out in the world. So there's a whole chapter where he goes outside, meets kids. They're thinking that he's just this little boy that's in a monster costume. He comes back so excited from it that he thinks, oh, well, there's got to be another holiday that I can sneak out for. Celeste also gives him a radio that he can play a radio down in the basement. And that's important to know because he sometimes talks about the radio. So let me go into, I just skipped chapters 2 and 3, and I'm going to go into chapter 4.
Okay, exciting.
Chapter 4 is Watch Those Feathers. The mansion smelled of pumpkin pies, turkey roasted in the oven, and fresh bread. There were a few guests staying for Thanksgiving, and Celeste wanted them to feel like they were home with family. Downstairs was a completely different story. The monsters would wait until the humans were done eating upstairs before they could enjoy their own feast. Celeste would ring the bell when it was time for them to move about. Shh, Mrs. Vanderpang said, standing still as a statue. She was an older monster who had lived with Toby's family for years. She was skinny and fluffy with pink straw for hair. She had no children of her own and loved to tell Toby and his sister Michaela what to do. Everyone froze as the humans moved about over their heads. Children, you must be extra quiet today, Toby's mom said. Miss Celeste has people upstairs. Ugh, I hate staying quiet all day, Michaela whined. Young monster, you will do as you're told. It's the least we can do for the woman who takes care of us, Toby's dad declared, as Mrs. Vanderpang smiled knowingly. Toby made a face at his little sister. The family would now be watching her, and he could sneak away at the top of the staircase. He placed his head against the door to listen to the conversations. I think we're in for a mild winter, one male voice said. I'm not so sure, another replied. I've heard certain parts of the country are going to be covered in snow by December. Toby wasn't sure why adults always talked about the weather, but figured while Miss Celeste was busy with the guest, he would sneak outside and walk around. He had heard on his radio about a parade happening in town that morning. He had spent days creating a costume that resembled a turkey. He made big feathers to cover his fish-like skin. Well, people would assume he was part of the parade while he witnessed what a Thanksgiving Day was all about. The conversation seemed to be getting louder, so he knew it was time to make a break for it. Where are you going? His little sister said from behind him. Michaela, he whispered, go play in your corner. I'll tell, she whispered. Don't say anything and I'll bring you something back. You're going outside again? Shh, you're too loud, Toby warned. I won't be long. I'm going to check out the parade. What's in your bag? She asked. A costume. Why? I can't go out as myself since it's not Halloween, so I'm dressing like a turkey. Well, what if someone wants to eat you? She asked. No one is going to eat me, silly. They eat turkey all this day, all the time. Just go play quietly, Toby said, and don't tell Mom or Dad. Okay, be careful. I will. Toby slowly opened the door and tiptoed out of the mansion. In the backyard, he put on his turkey costume with all the bright feathers and headed toward Main Street, where he had heard the parade would take place. There were so many people, much more than on Halloween. He was overwhelmed by all the bodies and the noise. He kept bumping into people with his big feathers. Hey, watch those feathers, little boy, someone shouted. Oh, yes, sir, he said. Toby was pleased that someone thought he was a little boy. They weren't even noticing that he was different, that he was actually a monster. He chuckled to himself. With a bit more confidence, he decided to walk along inside the parade. The streets were lined with people watching the floats. There were so many humans all up and down the road. Toby saw how people were waving, so he waved back. Turkey, a little girl shouted. Oh, he's cute, the mom replied. Toby beamed with pride. He did some of his dance steps as he marched down Main Street. Toby was so joyful he had decided to come out and witness this day. People really seemed to be cheerful and thankful, and he assumed that was what it was all about. He watched as families gathered up to leave and go home to celebrate around their tables, where he was sure they had the same food he smelled at the mansion. As he walked home, he saw some kids playing football with their dads on a field. Everyone always seemed so pleased out in the real world. There were times in the basement that the monsters seemed happy too, but none of them knew what they were missing outside. There was so much more to experience, and staying hidden away didn't feel like a way to live. Toby wondered if he would ever be able to live in the real world, or if he would always be confined to the basement. Miss Celeste was a wonderful host to all the monsters, but how long could she keep them hidden? What if someone found out? What if she moved away? Wouldn't it be better to just go out and take their chances? From what he'd seen, he didn't believe people would be mean to him. Maybe they would even grow to love the monsters. Maybe he should give another holiday a try. When he listened to his radio, it seemed that people were most gleeful around holiday times. Well, he had seen Santa appear at the end of the parade today. He had also heard the radio people talking about Christmas a lot. He figured he had a month to learn as much as he could. At 8 years old, he had already seen how Miss Celeste had decorated the mansion for Christmas on previous years. This would be the year he would venture out and see what happened outside of the mansion on that special day. The only question was what he would dress up as this time. That's the end of that chapter.
Oh, wow. I love that he dressed up as a turkey to go out to the parade. That is so cute. So,
He's trying to figure out ways that he can hide. They've been taught for so long that they have to stay hidden in the basement. And that's really what the story is about, is acceptance and diversity. And Miss Celeste has done everything she can to keep them hidden from the world. And the more he goes out, the more he thinks, well, why should I be hidden? Why can't I go out and enjoy the world like everyone else?
I love that. And I am going to have to read it to find out what happens, to see if he's able to get that acceptance from the real world or not. That is super exciting. I did want to ask about the monsters. So it's a monster family that lives in the basement. What kind of monsters are they? Are they all the same?
They are not all the same. So, and as I spoke with Shelby as we were discussing the illustrations for it, I totally let her come up with how she saw Toby in her head. I described him as, fish skin and dog hair, and I had all these descriptive words. And I did the same thing with some of the other monsters, but I wanted her to make them as diverse, just like we're diverse as humans, which was also important when you do see human illustrations in the book, that you see a diversity there too. My entire, I would say, adult life and beyond that has always been about diversity. I started out 12 years ago with my first children's book was about my godson that has autism. And it won a contest with a publishing house. They published the book, they published the sequel, and I've spent 12 years still to this day where I travel to schools every year and I talk about autism awareness and I talk about diversity and that it's okay to be different and don't be afraid of someone because they're different. And at the time I was talking about someone with autism that may have outward signs of, like, my godson would flap his arms and do things of this nature. And so I would talk to the students about this, and I would always say, look around the room, look how different we all are. So I feel like I just continued that same message into this book. I thought this book was going to be another picture book like my first 3 books. There was just too much story to tell, and Toby wanted more adventure than I could do in a 32-page picture book, which is why it became an early reader chapter book. Perfect for parents to read with kids that are just learning to read, or all the way up to 3rd or 4th grade, they can read the book on their own.
See, that is absolutely incredible. And I know you said, so your first picture book was about your godson and autism awareness. And what other picture books have you done?
So that one was called Chicken Boy, The Amazing Adventures of a Superhero with Autism. And it was Chicken Boy because my godson, as I said, he would flap and he would make this noise and go, "Baka!" just out in the public. And I was out to dinner with him one night. Me and his older sister were talking. I'm like, well, what if that was like his battle cry and he was a superhero? So that all became the superhero with autism. And then the second book was the Chicken Boy dealing with doctors and dentists. And that was because I would travel to schools and I would have teachers or the nurses at schools say, oh, you should talk about the sensory issues that children with autism have. So that book, I really had to dive in and do some research so that I could write it. When I go to schools, I always tell them I am not an expert on the subject. I am just this writer who happens to love his godson and wanted to get the story out. So both of those books were still about autism. The third one was in 2014, I started a new job where I manage an art center. And there's an art center in Westchester County, New York. And I managed that. And my second week there, it may have even been my first week, a squirrel got into the theater. And we had to, have it removed and this whole thing. But my brain started going instantly about, oh, well, that squirrel wanted to get in here and be on the stage, because it was a theater. Cut to 4 or 5 years later, I finally wrote that book. And it was Irving the Theater Nut. And it was all about a little squirrel who would watch children rehearsing through the windows of a theater. And all he wanted is he doesn't want to gather nuts with his mother. He doesn't want to prepare for winter. He just wants to be on stage and perform. So again, that was about being different and not going along with the norms. And sometimes I'll say, I'll be in a room full of children. I'll say, who here likes to play sports? Who likes to sing in the choir? And I show all the differences. And Irving's thing was he just wanted to perform. So even that book is still about being diverse and showing how different we all can be.
I love that, especially as a theater fan myself.
Oh, I'm a huge theater fan.
That sounds amazing. I also wanted to ask you, you did mention in your book about chosen family. If you could explain that to our listeners a little bit, because they might not grasp that completely.
Absolutely. And thank you for zeroing in on that. I think it's important for adults and children to know that, sometimes we choose the people that we want to be with in life. And family does not have to necessarily mean the people that we were born into that family. It can be people that you choose to be your family. So growing up, we were a foster family and we would take in some foster children. And then we also adopted my youngest sibling. So seeing how all of that makes me sometimes think chosen family because you're choosing the people you want to be with. Cut to, I grew up in Texas. I moved to New York when I was 18 to be an actor. You were talking about theater. I was an actor. I still am an actor, but I was an actor for many, many years. And I felt being away from my family, I had to surround myself with a new family, with people that I chose to have in my life. And to this day, I moved here in the late 80s, and I still have those people, and I think of them as family. They were not the people I grew up with, or my siblings, or my parents, or my cousins. These are friends that are so close that they become your chosen family. And Celeste does not get to see her family that much in the book. They don't come around, even though she runs the family mansion. Just people don't come back and see her. They've all moved away. And so she has Rick and Margaret who work with her, and she has the monsters who really are like her family. So that is her chosen family.
I love that. You have such incredible themes in all of your books. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Thanks. And did you have anything else that you would like to share with our listeners today?
You know what? You can go find all of my children's books on gregsimagination.com. There are reviews there. There are pictures of different events that I've had. There are links where you can buy the different books. And you may even want to have me come to your school or your library. So there's information there. You can do that as well.
That is so incredible. I will also have that linked in the description of this podcast as well. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. It was so awesome for Greg to share his stories with us today. That was super exciting. But, you know what that sound is? It's time for a shout out for all of our co-creators. Show us co-creators in the app. Tell me, tap, tap, tap. Hello, smartphone, tell us today. Did all our friends have fun and play? I hear my friends. Charlotte, Harper, Evelyn, Abigail, Amelia, and Henry had fun today. Won't you join me another day? If you would like to have a shout out and be a co-creator on the Rella B Books show, you can always go to rellabooks.com and click on the Want to Participate section where you can create your own story and have it sent in for a chance to be read on the podcast, and also have a shout out on the show. Thank you guys for listening today. All things Rella B Books can be found on rellabooks.com as far as free coloring pages, free reading activities, all of my books, and so much more. Thank you for listening today, and we'll see you next time. Bye, and happy Thanksgiving.